All right. Well, welcome to the 2024 series of winter webinars on fruit culture and fruit care. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, John Cline, who I think has been with the University of Guelph for over 25 years, has it been? And in that role, he does research extension and even classroom teaching. His research is focused on tree fruit crops, which includes apples, pears, and stone fruit. And he does a lot of work on rootstocks, cold hardiness, and more recently, hard cider varieties. But we've invited him here today to talk about some of his chemical thinning research with new chemicals available, and most wonderfully for stone fruit. But we're also still interested in chemical thinning of apples. So without further ado, it's Dr. John Cline.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Renee. And I'd first like to begin by thanking the organizers of this webinar, Renee and Elizabeth, and perhaps others. And it's a pleasure to meet with you virtually, growers from, I think, all the way from Maine to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and New York. So today I'd like to talk specifically about new thinning opportunities with Accede for apple and peach, and Metramitron for apples. I'm located, in terms of my research, is conducted at the University of Guelph Simcoe Research Station. This is on the north shore of Lake Erie. I'll have a picture in the next slide to show you the geography. But as Renee indicated, we conduct most of our apple research, some peach work here. Much of the peach work is done in the Niagara Peninsula. So the research station conducts research on a number of topics: vegetable crops, hazelnuts, strawberries, breeding, and herbicides. So my colleagues and I work on a number of crops for the Ontario horticultural industry. So just to give you a lay of the land, I'm going to get my, see if I can get my pointer up here. I should have done that ahead of time. Simcoe is located in, as I mentioned, on the north shore of Lake Erie here. The University of Guelph is located about another location closer to Toronto. And most of the peach production is located in the Niagara Peninsula, just west of Niagara Falls and below the escarpment. The apple production is throughout the province, located in close proximity of the Great Lakes, Southern Ontario, Georgian Bay, and all the way up north of Lake Ontario up to towards Ottawa. And today I'd like to talk about, this is an outline of what I'd like to present. First, we'll talk about thinning peaches, past approaches and challenges. Some of our ACC research on peaches and plums. Then I'd like to review the Accede label. Grower recommendations for adopting Accede use. And the next point is a duplicate of above. And then lastly, talk about apple thinning, use of Accede and Metramitron, and show you some of our data. So I would be glad to take questions during or after, whatever you prefer or whatever you normally do. With respect to thinning peaches, many approaches have been tried in the past, ranging from pruning to reduce the crop load, fruitlet thinning, or even inhibiting flowers. In terms of fruitlet thinning, a number of products and mechanical and chemical approaches have been used. These include algitol, ethyl, tree shaking, rope thinning, applying blossom desiccants, and even high pressure water we've tried. But none of these have really taken on commercially and been widely adopted. There's also compounds, gibberellic acid, that can inhibit flowering. That we've tested that as a way to reduce the flower bud count. But again, that doesn't seem to be widely adopted by the industry. So when the new product of this ACC or Accede came out, it really does open up brand new opportunities for stone fruit producers. The challenge of thinning stone fruits are several. First of all, the timing for hand thinning is done quite late, so you don't really get the benefit of early thinning and its impact on increasing fruit size. It's done, should be done by the end of phase 1, about 50 days after bloom, to get the maximum benefit in fruit size. However, that's not always possible with if the trees set a lot of fruit, and depends on the labor, amount of labor available. Also importantly, and I think growers know this more than I do, the labor costs for all the farm management practices is increasing dramatically. On the right, I have a graph of minimum wage rates in Ontario. Initially, sort of between the 1965s and 2005, they were sort of increasing in a linear fashion, but you can see this curve going higher. So rates are actually increasing more rapidly in the recent years. Our labor costs are estimated to be about $17.45 per hour. That's based on 2018 Ontario Tender Fruit Grower Survey. But that, obviously that's out of date. We're above that, probably quite markedly. Also, the other issue is that labor scarcity and availability and lack of skilled labor for hand thinning. So other thinning methods have not largely been adopted, so growers are relying on this high amount of labor to hand thin. In terms of hand thinning, the Ontario Tender Fruit, our local tender fruit organization, did a cost of production study in 2018, and they estimated that 50 hours per acre were required to hand thin mature peach and nectarine trees. And that's second to harvesting, which was the most labor intensive. So harvesting and thinning make up a large majority of the labor costs, the hand labor costs. And of course, thinning does reflect on harvesting. If you reduce the number of fruit, you can increase your harvesting speed and reduce the labor. So the two are interrelated. So as I mentioned, ACC was introduced by Valent Biosciences. It's formulated as Accede, and the chemical name is 1-amino cyclopropane 1-carboxylic acid. It's a naturally occurring amino acid found in plants, and it was discovered just over 40 years ago. And its role was discovered on the right. You can look at the pathway of where ACC plays in the production of ethylene. So ACC is generated in the plant. It's oxidized by ACC oxidase enzyme to create ethylene. And we know that ethylene has a number of different functions in the plant. Basically, it's a senescing compound, and it can accelerate flower and fruit drop, enhance fruit color and ripening. So the ACC oxidase, as I mentioned, that is a temperature-dependent enzyme, which converts ACC to ethylene. And the rate of ethylene release following ACC applications to the peach trees reaches a maximum about 2 to 3 days after, and then you can see the ethylene levels declining. These are based on limited studies where they use a gas chromatograph and measure the ethylene surrounding fruit or flowers. Valent reports, and I would agree, that we haven't seen any gamosis with ACC unlike what you might see using a product like ethanol, which releases ethylene directly. And ACC, what it does is it, through the development of the ethylene, triggers abscission zone to cause the flower, the fruit to drop. So ACC is manufactured by Valent Bioscience. And these are some of the points that they make in their presentations, that it's the first new chemical thinner for stone fruit. And their goal, as they recommend, is not to eliminate hand thinning, but to reduce it approximately by 50%. So you still need to hand thin based on the recommendations, but if it's efficacious, you won't need to hand thin as much, thereby resulting in labor savings and reduction in labor costs. When you look up the Accede label in the US, it is listed for a number of crops, apple and stone fruits, including apricot, sweet and tart cherry, nectarine, peach, and others here, plum. Interestingly, at this point, I've only seen comments really about apple and peaches. I haven't seen any data from Valent on plums or some of these other crops. But there's no reason to suggest that it won't work on those crops. It's just I haven't seen the data, and I think we'll see that coming out in the near future as more studies are done. Just looking at my times. So the benefits of Accede are that it reduces hand thinning, delivers early crop management to improve fruit size, indirectly then improving color and quality, reduces the tree and limb damage by heavy crop loads. And I think this is a very important point. It may improve harvest management by advancing and compressing fruit maturity. So we have worked with this product since approximately 2018, conducting a number of studies on peach. And this last year, 2023, we've started initiating studies on plum and Japanese, European and Japanese plums. So I will present some of that data to you after the next few slides, but what our study objectives was to determine the optimal rate and the most effective time for applying ACC to thin peach trees. And then secondly, to measure any negative effects of the compound on tree health, including leaf yellowing and leaf drop, because ACC will, because it's an ethylene promoting compound, it will cause leaf yellowing and leaf drop if it's applied at certain times. And then measure the effects of ACC on fruit quality and look at the economics and the benefits of using ACC, the potential costs, negative impacts, and improved benefits for hand thinning and improved fruit size. So in all our studies, we've applied our sprays using a air blast sprayer rather than a handgun. We try to mimic what's being done in the orchard. In the first study I'll present, this is an early variety, Herodon. It's a local variety developed by Agriculture Canada. Richard Lane out of Harrow developed this variety, and we used it because it's the early variety. We thought we might be able to get some of the best benefit in size if we thin it early with Accede. Most of our orchards are fairly low density, spacings of 10 by 18. We work with pretty close to mature trees. In this instance, they were 4-year-old trees. And we always applied tree row volume dilute calculated by the formulas that are out there. And it's a freestanding open vase system. In this instance, we had 8 treatments. We had 5 replications, and these orchards, this orchard was irrigated. So as I mentioned, we're looking at 3 timings. The yellow indicates basically bloom or around bloom. Green is shuck split, and orange is post bloom 19 millimeter fruitlet diameter. And we're working with the labeled rates. the load rate of 300 or 600 parts per million at all these timings. And in addition, at the early timing, we split the application with a 300 part per million applied at pink and full bloom. In terms of the days before or after bloom, the hand thin control was, that's our positive control. We don't have an untreated control because it was done in a commercial orchard. Hand thinning was done 47 days after bloom. And then the days before or after bloom are indicated here on the right column and the dates. I won't go into that in any more detail now. But ACC was applied as late as a month after for the late applications. And we took a number of measurements, in particular on the effect of thinning, leaf phytotoxicity, effects on the fruit and fruit quality, and economics and vegetative growth. Some of the probably the most important metrics are fruit set, crop load, and time to thin trees, as well as yield per tree, average fruit weight, and proportion of the fruit that are harvested on the first on each harvest date. So when we apply ACC in this 2021, I photographed the response. We saw the flowers desiccating on the distal portion of the branch. They seemed to be more affected the basal portion, and it took a week to 2 weeks to observe this response. We didn't see the flowers dropping sooner than that, but I know that Valent has reported that you might see a response as soon as 5 days. But we didn't see it in our situation. Perhaps it's related to the weather or the cultivars. The nuances of using ACC, I think, are going to depend a lot on understanding your weather conditions. And this graph shows you in 2021 some of the situation we were faced with our early applications. So we had atypical warm temperatures in March. You probably had that throughout the Northeast, New York and Massachusetts, Maine and Pennsylvania and New Hampshire. Anyway, we had that warm spell in March. It advanced the bloom. We were quite concerned about a significant frost event occurring, but then it cooled right down around the 20th of April, actually sooner than that, early April, as indicated by the blue is the high daily air temperatures and the red is the low. The arrows here indicate treatment application timing. So the pink bud was at T1, calyx or shuck split was T3, T4 was a fruitlet, and full bloom was that T2. But really what I wanted to point out here was that during these early timings, the low temperatures were close to or even below 0 degrees just before the first application. So these are Celsius, but the low 30s in Fahrenheit. And this is noteworthy because even though we had these low temperatures, ACC performed very well. Unlike you would see in apple thinners, where normally you need that heat to make the thinners work. So ACC appears to be very effective, in fact, possibly more effective at these low temperatures. So here's some of our results on Haro Dawn. This is fruit set for 100 flowers, and it shows you that only the 600 part per million rate at pink bud or at the 19 millimeter timing reduced fruit set. The shuck split sprays were not any different than the hand thin controls over here. And there was no difference between whether we split the application as 2 300 ppm applications or 1 600 at the early stage of pink and full bloom. One of the most important factors in thinning is the time to thin. And as I mentioned earlier on, Valent would like to see this product work by reducing hand thinning by 50%. So the ideal target is reduce the amount of hand thinning by 50%. So this is your hand thin control. It took about 40 hours per acre to hand thin these trees in that particular year. And with those higher rates, we saw anywhere from a 63 to 81% reduction in the amount of time to thin those trees. In terms of fruit weight, we saw slight increases at the early application timings. Remember, this is an early variety. It has a short growing period, and so the benefits may not be as large as having a fruit that's on the tree that matures later. But there was some marked improvement in fruit size. In terms of harvest management, we did these bars represent the total yield, the height of the bar for the hand thin, and the blue represents how much percentage of fruit on the first harvest, and the red is the second harvest. So it didn't really change the amount of fruit that's picked on the first harvest date, but it certainly did affect yield, and you can see where the 600 ppm rates really reduced yield quite markedly. And the 300 part per million really didn't have any effect at all. In terms of the value of the fruit per acre, the hand then generated just over $10,000. This does not include packing costs. It includes just the gross value of the fruit. And we saw, again, probably because of the reduction in yield, a lower gross value return with these higher rates of Accede, both at the flowering time or pink stage or at 19 millimeters. Now I thought I need to make an important point here. I thought I had in my slides, the 19 millimeter timing is off label. Valent recommends and approves applications up till shuck split only. So these 19 millimeter applications are off the label and are not recommended for reasons I'll explain in a moment. Our second experiment in 2021 dealt with another variety. Again, it's a local variety called Vivid. Excuse me. The orchard setup, it was a different orchard, 5-year-old trees, but much the same setup. And in this instance, we only had 4 treatments, including the hand thin control. We focused on the pink bud and full bloom timings at the same rates I presented before. On your right, you can see the phenology at pink bud and full bloom. That was the time we were targeting when to apply. So the pink bud was 10 days before full bloom. Hand thinning again was 47 days after. And the location was different orchard, but similar environmental conditions, as I mentioned for the first experiment. In this instance, we saw a reduction in fruit set with 3 and 600. The 300 was not statistically different than the hand thin control, but nevertheless, we saw numerically some reduction and quite a marked reduction at 600. And we also saw a marked reduction in the time to thin, both at the 3 and 600, in line with the fruit set data. So the red line shows you 50% amount of hand thinning of the hand thin control. So the 600 part per million almost hit that, just slightly below, with 63% reduction in hand thinning. In terms of fruit size, again, we saw a marked increase in fruit size. The hand thin fruit were very small. This orchard was not irrigated. The crops were really heavy. The grower felt they were overcropped. But with the ACC treatment, we did see a 29 to 83% increase in size. So some very large fruit. And in terms of how much fruit we're picking on the first and second harvest date, and this relates to harvest management. We saw 48 to 80 to 97% of the fruit were harvested on the first harvest date with the Accede trial experiment treatments, as opposed to 39% for the hand thinning control. So the grower was able to pick more fruit earlier and get those to market and make probably more efficient use of their labor. The height of the bars again indicates the yield. So the yield was, for all these treatments, was either similar or above the hand thin control. And then the value of the fruit kind of in line with the yield. Everything was similar to the hand thin control statistically. So just to summarize, ACC was effective in thinning both varieties. The timings pink to full bloom were effective for Herodon, the pink, and the split application were effective for Vivid. We saw some increase in size with Herodon, more with the Vivid, the later mid-season. That's around Red Haven time. We saw a marked reduction in hand thinning. We saw a decrease in fruit value with the Herodon, indicating that we probably over-thinned. And some other benefits here. Probably most notably, we saw advanced maturity for the Vivid. And overall, we saw very little phytotoxicity at any of the timings noted. Now, in 2022 is a very different season. We had some winter injury on our peach trees. A lot of the crop was affected, and growers, it was noticeable that there was fewer flowers on the tree. And in this instance, we probably would either reduce or not thin with ACC. However, we wanted to go ahead with the trial anyways. There was a lot of orchard availability, probably due to this winter injury. Thinning, in fact, was done by the grower, removing on average 380 fruit for the hand thin control. But overall, we saw no effect of ACC in 2022 on Red Haven. This is on variety Red Haven. And I think it's also noteworthy to say that even though we applied ACC in a year where we would either reduce the rates or maybe not apply at all, it didn't cause overthinning. Now in 2023, we're repeating the studies, and I brought, we have a new, I have a new master's student, Sophia Frenzluber, who, this is her data. She's in the process of doing all the analysis, but this is a high-level summary of what we've seen. So in 2023, we changed our approach a little bit. We wanted to try to fine-tune the rate between 300 and 600 part per million. And we figured 600 was overthinning, so we targeted 300 to 500. The timings again were full bloom, 20 millimeter. And just a few notes about the season. It had an unusually long bloom period with cold weather. Fruit set was good, and the trees required hand thinning. We worked with the same varieties as before. And this is a summary of what we saw. I'm not showing you all the data because of time, but we saw that ACC was effective at full bloom, but not at the 20 millimeter stage for Herodon. But it was effective at both timings for Vivid. ACC increased fruit weight again slightly for Herodon compared to the hand control, but for Vivid again, it increased it quite markedly up to 63% depending on the treatment. We saw a 37 to 43% reduction in hand thinning, and we saw in both instances more fruit being harvested on the first harvest date. In terms of phytotoxicity, we saw very little toxicity of phyto at full bloom, some moderate toxicity on Herodon at the 20 millimeter stage. For the Vivid, very little at full bloom, but moderate to high at the 20 millimeter stage. And that is why there is concern about late applications post bloom, because you can see both leaf yellowing and leaf drop. I have some pictures of those coming up. We also started our first studies on plum in 2023. Now, it's noteworthy that for plums, the rate of ACC is recommended to be lower because they're more sensitive. Rates range from 150 to 450 parts per million. We timed it at full bloom in 10 millimeters. In part, the reason for the later application, as it is for peaches, is that growers are somewhat concerned about frost around bloom. So later applications, are ideal if the label allows it. This again is off-label, but we wanted to test it in our research plots. We had a very long, cool bloom period. We picked out 2 varieties, early golden Japanese plums and a blue plum called Vibrant. It turned out the early golden didn't set, maybe they had 2 or 3 fruit per tree. Basically, it was a wipeout. However, we continued our treatments just to look at phyto. For the Vibrant plum, this is Prunus domestica, a prune plum, which are quite popular amongst Ontario growers. It was somewhat effective at full bloom, but not at the later timing. It did increase fruit weight slightly. It reduced the gross value of the fruit because of yield reductions. The grower didn't need to hand thin this year, although other years they do normally hand thin. And there was no phyto at the full bloom, and actually very little phyto at the 10 millimeter, both for the European plum and the Japanese plums. Okay, so based on the Accede label, which was registered in 2021 by Valent, this is the US label I think I pulled up. It's a 40% granular formulation, but weight by weight. It is not, unfortunately, registered as an organic compound. The label states to use 300 to 600 parts per million. And the timing, as I mentioned, is pink bud to petal fall. No post-petal fall applications are recommended. And the reason why the late applications are not recommended is because at the 20 millimeter stage, or even somewhat sooner after petal fall, you start to get these lateral leaves developing, and those leaves are sensitive to ACC and ethylene. Whereas earlier on at pink bud and bloom, there's very little foliage on the tree at that point. So that's why the peach tree doesn't seem to be as sensitive. And these late applications can result in leaf yellowing and drop in a dose-dependent manner. And peaches seem to be more sensitive, definitely, than plums. This is a type of phytotoxicity you can see. It's not necessarily going to be this in every case. But on the left, you see 500 parts per million applied 30 days after full bloom. And the photo was taken 10 days after spraying on vivid peach. And there's quite a bit of leaf yellowing, and which resulted in almost immediate leaf drop. Whereas on plums on the right, this is the highest rate, 450 ppm we tested, and there was essentially no leaf yellowing or no leaf drop. So these are recommendations for using Accede. Some key points. First of all, cultivars are going to differ in their sensitivity. We haven't had a chance to test obviously all the cultivars that are grown, but you can expect some difference in sensitivity, and learning about those sensitivities will come over time through practice. You need to have good tree coverage for effect. Do not apply when a frost is expected. Either delay your application or don't apply at all. Applications above 90 degrees Fahrenheit may result in overthinning and more leaf yellowing and leaf drop. As I mentioned earlier, it's very effective at low temperatures. temperatures around 40 degrees, and we don't have an exact temperature here to state, but I'm putting 40 degrees, but we know that cold temperatures either before or after application can result in increased efficacy. In our studies, we use a non-ionic surfactant to improve or at least guarantee performance, and something like Regulate or something similar to that that you have available would be appropriate. And then lastly, depending on your canopy, Valent recommends 80% of the spray to be applied to the upper 2/3 of the canopy, basically where most of your fruit are going possibly to be, depending on the tree age. As mentioned, Accede is a granular formulation. There is a liquid formulation. I borrowed this from Valent. The liquid is only available in California. It's recommended 100 gallons. The rates are based on 100 gallons per acre. And you can make a second application as one person asked, but it's generally not recommended. Again, I borrowed this from Valent, from Todd Berkthal. And it shows you some of the results with commercial applications in 2022 and the reduction fruit set. So there's a lot of cultivars here listed on the bottom, and you can see the response varies by cultivar. On average, they saw a 40% reduction in fruit set. And I also need to point out that these responses here may actually be weather related. They're not necessarily variety related, because it's hard to tease out the interaction of the environment and the peach. They might flower at different times, for example, different orchards, etc. So, but I think you can expect differences in cultivar performance. So considerations for using Accede for the first time in 2024, I recommend start with a lower rate, 300 to 500 parts million. Definitely leave some rows untreated for comparison purposes and flag those. Record your pollination conditions, air temperatures before an application. And, we learn a lot from interacting with our neighbors. And so certainly talk to your neighbors to find out what they've done and what response they're getting. And take detailed records as we do in apple thinning, cultivar differences, leaf phytotoxicity, maybe note when and where the flowers are dropping, labor savings, etc. Some encouraging thoughts and observations are when fruit set is light and bloom is reduced, ACC hasn't caused over thinning in our trials, and it is effective at lower temperatures, which is quite unusual for a plant growth regulator. So I prepared a slide, kind of a decision support tree, to walk you through the process. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you'll have it for later. Basically, on the left of this slide, if you have a normal situation where the trees are mature, there's adequate bloom, appears to be a full crop, low risk of frost, and there's good fruit potential, you just walk through this step by step. If there's no high temperatures, then you apply the rates 300 to 500 parts million. However, these are the situations on the right where you might want to either adjust or not apply ACC, and these include an earlier bloom than normal. You might want to delay the application, lower flower density than usual, or trees under stress, and check your air temperatures. These might result in reducing your ACC rates or not applying it at all. And if there's evidence of frost injury to flowers or developing fruit, then probably I would advise, at least in the first year, not applying ACC. Now I want to move on and talk about apple thinning in the last few minutes I have left. And I'm not going to go into all the benefits of apple thinning. I think most growers know that. I'm going to just focus on two new compounds, metamitron and Accede for apples. These are formulated as Brevis and Accede. These are the chemical companies that are producing them. Metramitron is a photosynthetic inhibitor, And the ideal timings the company is recommending is between petal fall and up to 25 millimeters. And my understanding, it's going to launch in about 2025, so it's not available currently. Whereas Accede is available, and I already talked about that compound. It is now available both in Canada and the US. And the timing on their label recommends anywhere from petal fall to 20 to 25 millimeters. Rates for apple are a little bit lower than peach, 200 to 400 parts per million. You can apply from full bloom until that 25 millimeter timing. The label states that ACC or Accede is most effective when the king fruit diameter is about 15 to 20 millimeters. So we've done trials for a number of years, starting in 2014 up until this last year, on Gala, Ambrosia, and 1 year Crimson Crisp. And the goals of our studies were look at rates and timing. So we have various timings and different rates of Accede, ranging from 150 parts per million to 450, and the timings anywhere from petal fall to 25 millimeters. And in 1 year, in 2022, we actually did a bloom application on Crimson Crisp. All applications were made with air blast sprayers and included a non-ionic surfactant. So this slide shows you a summary of our results. I'm not going to show you the data itself because of lack of time. But in 2015, my master's student, Michelle Cortez, did 2 years of studies and found that 300 and 400 ppm ACC was effective on Gala when applied at the 17 millimeter stage. In 2015, 400 parts per million was not effective when applied slightly later at the 22 and 25 millimeter stage. For Ambrosia, one of our top 3 varieties in 2017 and 18, 200 to 400 parts per million was applied, anywhere from 8 to 15 millimeters, and it was ineffective in those years in reducing crop load, and there was no thinning when it was applied at the later stage of 15 to 20 millimeters. In 2023, we applied 400 ppm, the highest rate, at a late stage of 22.5 millimeters as a sort of a rescue thinner. It was effective by reducing crop load, and we used it in conjunction with a carbaryl 6-PA spray applied earlier at the 10 millimeter stage. In 2022, we applied 600 parts per million ACC at bloom, but it did not thin Crimson Crisp. So the results are quite variable. This is data from my PhD student on a 2-year study on Gala, basically looking at timing. She applied it between 7 and 22.5 millimeters, looked at crop load, number of fruit per cross-sectional area. In 2021, she didn't find any significant effect on crop load at any of these timings. However, in 2022, it did reduce crop load at the later timing of 18.5 millimeter king fruit diameter. So in summary, we've had variable results with ACC for thinning Ambrosia Gala over the 8 years of our studies. It has not been terribly effective at the later applications. And as a result, we probably recommend using this product in conjunction with other thinners. But we have not really tested that other than that one study with Crimson Crisp. It has caused some leaf yellowing and leaf drop, but it hasn't been too extensive and probably would not be of a major grower concern. Let's finish up by talking about a metamitron. This has been registered in a number of European countries, Chile, Argentina, South Africa, and Australia, and it's under development in North America and other countries. And it I'm told it's going to probably be launched in Canada next year. There's just the company Adama is getting the final documents together for registration. They recommend a base rate of 1.8 liters per hectare. So I haven't converted this to imperial, and a slightly higher rate in the west coast of US. Excuse me. Adama has developed a computer model. It's called Brevis Smart. It's an online model that takes into consideration temperatures, night temperatures in particular, fruit size, and then predicts the outcome of what kind of rate you need to get the effective thinning. They recommend petal fall to 20 millimeter timing, and to wait 8 days between a first and second application. And they indicate also that a non-ionic surfactant may increase thinning efficacy. However, we have not found the non-ionic surfactant has done a whole lot, but we generally include them in our thinners, including metamitron. We've learned that metamitron is an effective thinner. We've learned that it's most effective between 8 and 15 millimeters, and I would call that post petal fall. We've tried it at 5 to 6 millimeters. It wasn't effective. So it's that 8 to 15 millimeter window, and that the greater the amount of product you use, you get a linear response in thinning. So you can dial up more if you need to get more thinning. And generally, we found that 2 applications are required. So one going on about the 8 to 10 millimeter, and then the second one about the 15 millimeter. We've also found that generally rates above 1.8 liters per hectare are required to thin to the level that we would like. I think that concludes my presentation.
So I'd like to thank John Cline for sharing his results and being part of our webinar. And thank you very much for being here today. And next week is the strawberry breeder seminar. I don't work with strawberries that much, but I'm looking forward to seeing that one.